Welcome to the Ohio Arts Council's Rife Gallery programming series for our current show, A Common Thread, curated by Karen Peterson, Shar Norman. Today, we are thrilled to present the artist, Gwen Waight. As a brief reminder, everyone tuning in today is in listen-only mode. Feel free to utilize that chat function and ask questions. We'll be sure to get to them at the end of the talk. Also, please keep in mind that because we're presenting from separate locations, there might be variation of bandwidth. So if one of us freezes up or the sound fluctuates, thanks in advance for bearing with us. All right, thanks everyone, and welcome, Gwen.
Hi. Okay. First of all, I guess I'll introduce myself. My name is Gwen Waight. I am a found object assemblage artist. I have been working in found objects probably over 20 plus years. Before that, I did ceramics with my father. I live here in Peninsula, Ohio, and I've lived here for 22 years. My studio is here. I went to the University of Iowa and I graduated with my degrees in sculpture and ceramics. And before I was, when I went to University of Iowa and before I moved here to Peninsula, I lived in Chicago for 10 years, which is a great place to have found objects, to be able to find found objects, which I love. And in between there were a couple other places. I lived briefly in St. Louis while my husband did a fellowship there at Washington University. And let's see. Yeah, that's that. I was I'm not there's probably that's about it for where I've been and where I've lived. I grew up, which would be considered the wrong side of the tracks, in Des Moines, Iowa. I was born in Des Moines at Mercy Hospital. This is I had a little. When I was a baby, I lived in a little house other on close to Drake University, where my dad went to school. But after that, we moved to my dad's mom's when she died, which was my grandmother. When she died, we moved to this little house that she had. My dad had to just pay the back taxes and to fix the place up. And we moved to this house on the east side of Des Moines near the fairgrounds. It's funny because I took this picture about 3 years ago when I went back to the Iowa State Fair to see the house, because I'm like, I wonder if that house is still there. And of course, when it was at my house, it was this really ugly green. And it's funny how your memory is different. I drove past that house like 3 or 4 times going, that can't be the house. That doesn't look like the house. I remembered a big cottonwood. I think it had since fallen down. I remembered it kind of being a little bit more raised, but now it seems like it's really flat. So yeah, but that was my house. My first major influence was my dad, and where I grew up, which was Iowa. Sometimes I think about influences. Sometimes people think of influences as they are always a positive thing, but it doesn't always have to be that way. My dad gave me both positive influence and negative influence, but it's kind of what you do with that and how you interpret it and then shoot it back out into the world that makes a big difference. It's the same thing about Iowa and where I grew up. There was a lot of negative things that I grew up with, being, my mother is Japanese, and was Japanese. Well, she's still Japanese, but she's since passed. And my dad is German Irish. So I was a mixed race child growing up in Iowa at a time when there were not a lot of kids who looked like me. There were a lot of blonde, white kids, but not a lot of mixed race Asian kids. So that carries a lot into my work, and that influences me a lot. I loved growing up in Iowa. I probably owe a lot of like where I'm at and the person that I am because I grew up with those Midwest kind of roots. Um, my dad being the influence on me was that he was a potter and I worked in his studio a ton, and he wanted me to be a boy, but I wasn't. I was his only child at the time, and I was a girl, and he raised me up to be more like a boy. So I watched him a lot and was in his shadow a lot in his studio. And in the summer times, he was a teacher. Well, in the school year, he was a teacher, but in the summertime, he was a construction worker. So I had a lot of background with tools and a lot of, help me hold this, be here, you know. So I did a lot of things with tools, and I have a lot of background with like I'm not afraid of a table saw. I'm not afraid of drill presses. I'm not afraid of any kind of get messy, get dirty, and build it, which really helped me with my assemblages. The piece on the slide is that reference of being an Asian kid growing up growing up in Iowa and then moving somewhere like Chicago and having people ask me a lot, where are you from? And I would say Iowa, and they'd be like, no, well, where are your parents from? And I'm like, Iowa. And they're play this game and no, where did you come from originally? I'm like, okay, so we're not getting there. But so in this piece, I have an Asian map on the background of a letterpress, and that I use a lot of letter drawers to kind of go back to the whole idea that storytelling is a lot about what artists are doing. And so that's the foundation of this piece is a letter drawer to kind of go back to telling a story here. Another influence that I have is Louise Nevelson. There's so many things that I love about her and her work, from I don't know if the stories or the things that I've read about her are true, but she took a lot of the wood that she made or that she used at first because her father, again, an influence, worked in a wood shop. And so she would take the scrap from that. And she talks about like, moving around the furniture in their place and moving around things. So she was very much, I have that same kind of background where when I was working for my father, I would always be playing a kind of mental or 3D Tetris in, like, if I had to load up his van to go to an art fair, and I had to pack the pots up into a box, I would try and make it the most efficient way that I could so that I could get the most in there. And then once I had done that, then I had to take the boxes and load it into the van, and I had to figure out how to put the display. So I always had this sense of 3D appreciation, and it always spoke to me. And I think Louise Nevelson really has that too, where she's moving things around and thinking, and I, especially with her monochrome pieces or monochromatic pieces, she is paying attention to that negative and positive space of these three-dimensional things. So here again, Louise Nevelson in a different type of form. Same assemblage type form, but with gold instead of black. And I just love using that scraps and elevating it to such a higher form there. Another influence, and it's kind of funny because Law Wilson, I didn't know who she was. She wasn't on my radar when I went to art school at the University of Iowa. I had never heard of her. It wasn't until I moved here and I was doing my own assemblage, and people would either look at my assemblage, or occasionally what would happen is I would go into certain shops. There was this particular shop in Akron. It was an antique store, and it was just this house that was just packed to the brim of things. And I would go in there and collect things that I wanted for a certain piece or concept or an idea. And people would go, "Oh, do you work for Law Wilson?" And I'd be like, "No, I don't even know who that is." And then when I started showing my work, people would be like, "Oh, you must know Law Wilson." And I'm like, "I have no idea who this person is." So it was about 2 years after I was in Peninsula and in Akron area, showing and doing my work, that the Cleveland Art Institute had this program where you could go and tour um, artist studios. And so one of the studios was Law Wilson's. And I said, "Well, I've got to meet this Law Wilson because I've got to figure out who she is and what she does." And man, she was a pistol. She was great. She was funny. And her studio and her home were like a museum with artwork everywhere. And boy, there was envy because I would see a lot of the things. I said, "I can't believe they let me in here. I think I'm going to leave your studio with pockets full." And she just laughed because, she goes, "Oh, I could find more where that came from." And that's true. But it was funny how we collected a lot of the same objects without even knowing each other. And we grew up totally different, in different generations, in different areas, but yet we were collecting a lot of the same objects: rulers, pencils, colorful, crayons and paper, and just chain and different things. And we use them differently, but yeah, definitely an influence. Another person is Nancy Rubens. She uses, again, utilitarian and recognizable objects, but on such a huge, grand scale. The picture on the left is a piece that is getting installed in, well, it's already up now, but at the time was being installed in Chicago on the lakefront there, right down in like my neck of the woods where I lived in Chicago, which was in the South Side near the Science and Industry building, just a little north of the Science and Industry building on the lakefront. But she uses, and the other one is, I think, a piece that's on the side of the building in San Diego. When I went to a wedding, there's an art gallery there in La Jolla, and I got to see that piece there. But I just love that idea of taking things that you recognize and making it into an art form. And these pictures are just how my mind kind of goes to things, how I visually appreciate and interpret daily visuals that I find. The picture on the right is from a church. I'm not sure where, but I know it was in Europe. And my family and I, when we would go to travels, one of the first things we would do whenever we would go somewhere is go to find a big church, because some of the architecture and the artwork that churches had it's just tremendous, because the churches had the money and the means to have art which not everybody did. But then, even more than that, I would be drawn to something as utilitarian and fundamental and ritual as all these candles lit together. Um, it just really speaks to me on an art level, on an aesthetic. It's got so many layers of beauty in that. I had to take a picture. I'm sure the ceiling was beautiful and the floors and everything else and the gilding, but that arrangement of those candles just that really grabbed me. And then on the left hand side, I think I was at an antique store and I thought it was just great because um, those are tennis balls in that glass ball, but the what happens a lot, and I find these all the time, and this is like pure excitement for me when I'm walking along. I have a little lake house in Michigan, and I walk along the same stretch of 5 miles of beach in Lake Michigan. And when I find one of these balls, and I call them naked balls, but when I find a naked ball on the beach, I am so excited. And I use these balls all the time in my artwork. I just love that they've traveled and they've worn. And to me, they've become even more beautiful, that they've lost their orange, or not their orange, but their green fuzzy outer coating. They're just beautiful. More things in my daily walks and things that I'm drawn to. Obviously, the box of dentures. I wish I would have bought that box of dentures. I saw that at the Burton Antique show that they have seasonally here in Ohio. And boy, if that guy didn't want a lot of money for that. But it just was like so peculiar, but yet to me, very beautiful and strange. And again, it's a utilitarian object, fundamentally necessary, and yeah, just beautiful. And then on the right hand side is well, I took a trip with a friend to Boston, and this was actually the outer edges of a Holocaust memorial sculpture that somebody had made outside in downtown Boston. And the actual memorial itself was amazing, but I was stopped again, just like the candles, by this simple, taking the rocks. And I mean, it's obviously to drain the water away from the memorial and to keep the memorial dry. But dang, if they didn't take something so simple and make it just amazingly beautiful. And yeah, I just love it. Um, More things in the process of how I go along and collect my things. Um, I have on the left hand side is just a simple. That's like a simple morning walk of beach finds that I find that I will pick up. I always pick up balloons, Mylar balloons. I have a few pieces made with Mylar balloons. I wish that we could find as a human populace a different way to celebrate than having balloons, because they always seem to end up in the lake. I can always tell when there is a thing like Mother's Day or graduation, because the balloons just start to wash up onto the beach everywhere, and I will pick them up and have them. And then there are things, I don't think I've ever walked a beach or the beach that the same 5 miles that I walk, or even when I've walked to other places in other beaches where I don't find those Swisher Sweet, my little cigarillo toppers. I find those everywhere. I find those even just downtown walking in Cleveland or just anywhere. I just can't, and I never see people smoking them, so I don't know why I find so many of them, but I do. And then also um, in the beach finds there, you can maybe find a great day for me when I go, yay, I found a naked ball, is also if I find a tampon applicator, which you can kind of see the pink lining of one down at the bottom corner there. When I find one of those, I'm so excited. I'm like, oh, I found this. And I have a friend here who he said that his mom used to call those beach whistles because when they would find them as a kid, but I don't really call them that. And then on the right-hand side is all the soap that I love soap butts. Again, things that draw me in are things that usually have been touched by people and have some kind of connection with humankind, but then also show that it's lived and been a part of somebody's life and touched their lives, been useful to their lives, and then is either like not useful anymore, but is to me and is beautiful to me. So I have family and friends who will send me those all the time. And then, okay, going and then taking that to practice in my work is that I will take the idea of that utilitarian object, and then I turn it into an aesthetic. So these ice picks were something that were used, by many different people. And then again, just as I've taken the candles, like I appreciated that and the multiples of that and how you gather that up and then you turn it into an art aesthetic, which I've done with this piece. And this piece I like that the ice picks kind of come across as they can be beautiful because of the color and the wear, but they can also seem a little bit threatening, and maybe they have a little bit of a violent kind of idea. But that's the good thing about found objects is that each piece of utilitarian or found object carries with it a whole host of memories to each individual viewer. And so they may remember their grandma's kitchen, or they may remember, their dad was an alcoholic and was breaking up ice all the time. Or they just may remember always opening up a drawer in the kitchen and there were these ice picks or things like that. But usually a found object that I choose always seems to carry with it this idea of memories. And I like to incorporate, I love that brings a layer to even though it may seem like a simple thing, it adds a layer of memory and meaning to the viewer. Other influences and people who are then also taking something simple and utilitarian and then just elevating it to the next level. On the right-hand side, there's Chakaya Booker, who I was familiar with in Chicago. She had some installations there. And then it was kind of great how I got to see more of her work. My daughter was doing a master's degree in Utah, and I think that's where this piece was taken, was from their art center. But then also she did a artist in residency program here in Akron with LeBron James and with the University of Akron. And so she did a couple talks, and I got to go see her talk, and she worked with some kids making a couple murals and things. But she uses tires, predominantly tires, but she showed, when she did a talk, she showed some of her early work that also incorporated a lot of different found pieces along with some tire work, but she's kind of evolved more into just using the tires. but amazingly beautiful. And then on the left-hand side is Vanessa German, and she was a Pittsburgh artist that I actually was in a show with at the Hoyt. It was a show, I think, called Lost and Found. And so then I loved her work, and I started following her and looking at the pieces that she uses. And again, just like Law and just like the other artists that I've mentioned, we're using a lot of the same things, but in such a different, it's kind of like how anyone who could, everybody who uses a painters all use this, paint. They all use red, they all use blue, they all use yellow. They're all with their medium of paint. The colors are available to them, but then what they do with it. And it's the same for a found object artist who will, again, she's taking the, like she'll have in that one piece on the left, she's got a mirror right front and center. And I use mirrors, and she's got crystals down at the bottom, and I use those. But the way that we use them to tell our stories are so radically different. And, but again, still layered with so many meanings. And, yeah, it's great. I am noticing that my computer is maybe going to shut down. I hope not. It says that it's got low battery, which is crazy pants. So let's see. This is a piece that I have that is called Different Drum. Again, it is using those utilitarian objects, the ice picks, and a Boy Scout drum to convey a quote from Henry David Thoreau about, oh goodness, did I not bring up? I might have not brought up a plug. I might have to run down and get a plug. I did not realize that it had enough charge on it before. It was fully charged, but now it is thinking about not being charged, which is making me crazy. But let's see. It is a political piece about, how you might, it's a quote from Henry David Thoreau, who said, you can march to the beat of a different drum. And politically, I think that's how I am sometimes, is that I'm marching to the beat of a different drum. So that piece is using that. I'm gonna see if this will work. No. Okay. Well, we'll keep going and see if this shuts down on me or not. This is a side-by-side influence of Yayoi Kusama and how she has taken canvas pieces that she has made into phallic symbols to then convey part of childhood trauma that she has had. And I have done that on the other side with the piece that I have on the left-hand side called My Grandma Taught Me Nothing. And this had to do with an interpretation of that my grandma, when I used to go and spend time with her, with my cousins, I didn't realize at the time that she was kind of being a racist, but she would tell me that if I would put a clothespin on my nose when I would sleep at night, then I could have a pretty nose like my cousins, and I could have a normal nose. And that was really not okay. My cousins were these cute little blonde haired kids, and I was the Asian kid that was, I guess, not to her normal standards. And so so I've taken the childhood trauma and and made it into a piece, just like Yayoi has. This piece also I've used, again, found objects, simple things as a hand brush. Some of them are, I don't know if in this piece if I have toilet scrubbers, but they're all brushes that then I have taken Asian figurines that people use to decorate their homes because they're cute or kitschy or what, but ornamental. I have a few other pieces called ornamental oriental because that whole idea that I am decorative and meant to be that way. But so I've taken these to address that whole the microaggressions that I faced as a child that maybe I didn't see as negative, but that were definitely not positive, that I had to grow up with. And I was always told to, because I was a model minority, because Asians are seen as, quiet and demure and smart and hardworking, that all those were good things. But when you take and you pit minorities against each other, it diminishes both minority. It diminishes humanity. It's just bad. So I've made this piece and it's called Brush It Off because I was told so many times as a kid to just take all that and, oh, it's just a joke. Just brush it off. Just brush it off. So this piece is about environment. It's called Shitting Balls. And it's that, again, I found all these balls washed up on the beach and I love them and I love to find them, but it's not a great statement on the way things are in the world environmentally. This piece is called Comfortable in My Own Skin, which is kind of ironic because it also seems very, very threatening. But I think as a woman, maybe that is the point. No pun intended. But yeah, when a woman is comfortable in her own skin, sometimes that can be interpreted as a threat. And so I've taken the ice picks and I've made I actually have those woven onto a metal. I did a metal and I wove them onto a bust. So again, just an appreciation of multiples and found objects used in multiples and how that just can come. Something as simple as, like, on the left, those are all cigarettes. That was a show about there was a Chinese art show of all Chinese artists that it was at the Smart Art Museum in Chicago. And the other one, it was from, and it's not, I had some people say that they thought that was Elinette Sui, but it's not. It was another artist from Africa who uses like keyboard keys and wire, electrical wire, lots of electrical wire in their artwork. And they're just, and I'm just always in awe and appreciation when I find something that speaks to me so much like that. And then again, side by side things. The piece on the right is actually clay. I would go to shows like in Seco with my sister, and they have made casts of bones and then made them into clay and then turned it into a piece. And then my left side is just me picking up mostly organic material from the beach mixed in with a little bit of plastic. But again, just where my mind goes. This piece is about gun violence. It's called The Grind, and it is in the collection of the University of Akron's permanent collection. But yeah, I have taken toy guns that seem like, oh, they're not uh real guns, but yeah, I had so many people ask me though, because there were a few in there that looked like pretty real, but that's the danger of them all. And then I've taken meat grinders and a milking stool, and in the meat grinders, once the guns get ground into the meat grinder, I've made it look like it's turned into bling. So there are a lot of chains, a lot of, you know, medical emergency bracelets and different things that have come out of the grinders once you grind down the guns. Um, this piece is called Not My Job, as it says over and over and over again. And it uses all of the iron rests. So it's not the irons, but it would be like what the irons rest on uh, and take the heat actually while you're taking a break. And I have used that. Um, I think it was more of a response at the time. Somebody was kind of telling me what my job was as an artist and as a woman. And I kind of struck back to say that that's not my job. It's not my job to make you understand. Maybe to have a conversation, yes, but not to understand, not to make you feel comfortable, and not to make, well, and then obviously not to iron your shirts or not to do what you quote unquote women's work. So it was a response to that. Again, I'm back on the beach. This is on the left-hand side is after Lake Michigan decides to take a whole bunch of people's decks, and including mine. I had a shed. A lot of us had sheds on the beach that the water rose and it said, I'm taking that. And then how we respond to that. I made a piece on the right-hand side. It's called Just Ducky. And it was the things that I had found on the beach in the aftermath, big chunk of styrofoam, a little yard duck that was in somebody's lawn, beach pail and bucket handle and hose and a naked ball. And then a lot of times and at the bottom there's a soap and a plumb bob, because it basically always points down, and it's always gonna just like, that's where everything ends up. So this piece actually I did not make, but I was given it, and it is hanging in my wall. And though it looks like a brush, it's not a brush. It's just back to that appreciation of multiples in use. Somebody, and I get this very often in my practice, people see what I use and they're like, "Oh my God, that's awesome. Do you want this or do you want that? I have some of these." And so this person contacted me about some boxes that her mother had in the garage. And after her mom passed, she wanted to know if I could use them. And I said, "Oh, sure." And then I found one of the boxes and it was full of pine needles like this. And her mom, she goes, "Oh, yeah, that was my mom. She used to go out to the front yard and collect these pine needles off the yard, and she would just put them in a box." And I thought, oh man, your mom's an artist, um, because that was just so beautiful to me. And so I took that box and then I affixed those pine needles so they wouldn't come out of the box, because as I found them, they were loosey goosey, which was really beautiful. But then I also thought I would probably end up turning it over and they would all fall out and I'd be very sad. So I took some Elmer's glue and made a nice little parting in the pine needles and just basically used the whole thing of Elmer's glue and yeah, just glued them in there. So this piece is called Tenuous. And again, a lot of pieces, because of the things that I find on the beach, have a lot to do with and the environment and the state of the world. And these were all, this is all styrofoam. There are basically only three elements in this. It's styrofoam and mirrors that I've added, and that plastic rope that is found on the beach a lot that ties those together. And it's that whole idea of the relationship that we have with the things we use and the environment that we are in, and that's a very tenuous environment. So this piece is called So Demure, and it kind of goes back. I'm not a very good social media TikTok person, but I guess a while back there was this whole idea, everybody kept posting something saying, oh, that's so demure, so demure. And I kind of thought about how that relates to the Asian ideal of being petite and demure and quiet. And so I've taken those ice picks, and I did like when somebody saw this piece, they were asking me about the gold that I added onto the outside edge of the ice picks, and they said, "Eh, are those, because they could read them when you get up close, and they say Reese's and things like that. They were all old candy wrappers, and I collect a lot of old foil candy wrappers. And they said, why the candy wrappers, or why the Reese's? And I said, oh, it's kind of like my gilding. And they went, oh, so it's kind of like white trash gold leafing. And I was like, yeah, I'll take that. I'll take it. So yeah. This piece is called Women's Work. Again, back to, I mean, I guess if you look at a couple of my pieces and the titles, you would probably go, I don't want to go to her house. I don't think it's very clean, because I don't like to do housework, obviously, with not my job, and now women's work. But this is using an old push vacuum and all the things that you would use to clean or interpret as maybe a woman's job or woman's work, and incorporating it into a piece. And then I particularly like the whole base of this is on an ironing board, but the way that I've set it up to be, it almost looks like a coffin. And I really like that kind of has that feeling. This piece is called Baby Don't Cry, and actually is on view for the rest of this week at the OAL show, the Ohio Art League fall juried show. Again, it is a take on the world and politics that we are leaving our kids and the younger generations. And somebody had given me it was actually their kids crib, and they had made an attempt to make an assemblage and enter it into a show, but it didn't get in, and they weren't happy with it, so they said, hey, maybe you can do something with it. And I quickly disassembled the crib and then made it into this piece, along with a found piece of beech wood and some styrofoam. And I like that this piece can be hung. I've made it so that it can be hung in all four different directions. So when I gave it to the people at the OAL show, I said, they said, how do you want this hung? And I said, surprise me. And so I like that it can be viewed in any different direction. This piece is called Self-Care. I again have used those soap butts in an old exploded hot water. I was having some cramps one day, and I wanted to use a hot water bottle on my stomach, and and I was filling it up, and it must be old, or I didn't use it very often because it exploded. And the water, at least it was still in the sink when it decided to rip apart and not work. So I didn't have it on my bed or anything like that, but it just goes back to all the things of trying to take care of yourself. So This is a gun violence piece again. That idea of the toy guns and again, oh, look at the bright color. It's so much fun. You just think of just having a good time, and those building guys that I've put on the outside of the edge that are getting their heads blown through with the wire, and it all seems like fun and games, but really isn't. More appreciation. I'm always going to shows and looking at people sometimes that I don't necessarily go, I love this person. So, but then you go and you're really drawn in. And this was Murakami's show at the Cleveland Institute of Art, and it really spoke to me with all its multiples and pattern and layering. It really drew me in with all that color and all those patterns. And again, I go back to then how I use things. That I had been collecting brushes and I had set them out on a table, and I thought, wow, it's just cool the way it is. Sometimes that happens very often with things for me when I've taken it and I lay it out like that, just like the soap butts. And these are the brushes that I was collecting at the time, and I would taken them out of the box and I had laid them out on a table. And sometimes they're just gorgeous the way they are. Um, this is another artist who I love, Leonard Drew. He takes pieces of scrap, and the one on the left is all scrap wood that has been, some of it has been charred and burnt. And on the other side are scrap pieces of like shim and housing and things like that. And then at the bottom of that piece is broken tile and pottery that he has then made a beautiful, beautiful aesthetic. And I just appreciate that so much. This is a piece that I made for a show, also an environmental show. And it was the whole idea of trying to get water and only coming up with plastics, because these were the plastic that I would collect off the beach. And it was called Troubled Waters. But you know, when you see those colors, you're just so drawn to it. But yeah, it's kind of, and this is a piece called The Beach is Free. And again, my favorite finds from the beach, used in a rubber mold that I found, and all these things that I found on the beach. Um, the title comes from a Billy Bragg song, and I do that a lot too. I use a lot of music titles in a lot of my pieces. Oh, I think we're at the end. Yep.
I think so. I think this is the last piece. We can just hang out on this while we do Q&A. So if anybody has any questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat. We'll get to them. First question is, what's the weirdest thing you found?
Oh gosh. Well, you know, I mean, after you see those things like that I found that I could have, or because those dentures were pretty weird, but I didn't get to have those because they were really expensive. But you know, recently what I thought was very strange was I've been, like I said, that beach, and obviously I've been walking the same beach for 30 years, and I picked up so many. Well, recently I was walking it just this last time that I was up there a month ago, and I found these strange jaw. They were definitely organic, but they looked like a fish jaw, but it had these little bumps on it and like teeth. And I was like, what the heck is this? And the funny thing about that is that I have never found one before. And then that week I found three of them or four of them. And I was like, this is the strangest thing. And my daughter looked it up because she has a biology background, and it's definitely a fish. It's a freshwater fish. I think it was called a door bass or something, but it was like crazy. And so that was pretty weird.
With some good teeth on it. That's great.
Yeah, fish with teeth.
So, Gwen, what I would love for you to do is talk a little bit about your studio practice. Are you in the studio every day, and what does that look like for you? How have you established your practice? Take us through a day in the studio with you.
Um, a lot of times I don't make art just to make art. I'm lucky enough that my practice is that I get to make art when I want to make art. Um, and that's due to my husband doing what he does. But so often I will be making, if I'm making work, it's either because something that I have found or something that I've been given speaks so loudly to me that I need to put it into like it sparks an idea and I have to make it into a work. And then I will take that object into my studio and I will lay it usually on the floor or sometimes on a table if I can find room, but not often can I find room. And I will start to gather pieces, parts that then seem like they'll hold a good conversation with that and tell the story that I want to tell. Um, so that happens often where the object comes first, like something that's been given to me and I need to put it together. And that often, sometimes it doesn't always have to be necessarily a story. I may be doing the same thing that a painter does, far as I'm thinking about line and form and color and all the things that you're taught in our school when you're putting things together. So that may be that way. But a lot of times another piece that may be on the ground forming itself may have been more conceptual, where I like the show that I right there at the Rife, that piece, the pieces there came more because I was asked to think of a concept, which in this case it was an artist, Sue Kavanaugh, and it was in the case of that she had died and that she had left these pieces. So it was speaking more to our art practice and death and mortality. And so then the concept comes more to the forefront. And then I gather again the pieces that speak to that concept.
Wonderful. And that you actually went right into my next question, was talking about, the pieces within this exhibition, A Common Thread. There are a lot of things that you have in common with Sue regarding, esteem for nature and the want to reuse materials. Um, I'm I think it's also important to think about within this show the knock-on effect of community and being inspired by one another. And so, can you speak a little bit about um, how you foster community? I know that you go to a lot of shows and you speak lovingly about colleagues in the art world. Just curious if you might give a few words about how you have developed and continue to develop that community.
Yeah, I have a lot of, well, besides that, I appreciate the clay community because that's the background that I come from. So I love and support going to that. But then within because assemblage has actually, when I first started doing it back, 20, 25 years ago, there wasn't a lot of assemblage artists. Matter of fact, um, I might have been like the only one showing at the time. Doesn't mean that I was the only one doing it, but there wasn't a lot of assemblage artists, at least coming and saying, yes, I feel like I can show my work, or I want to, and now there are a lot of assemblage artists that I'm friends with, and um that's great because like I get, like I said, when I get gifted things, people ask me all the time, hey, can you use an old vacuum? And I'm like, I don't know, but I might know somebody that can. And so I know a lot of artists in this show were a little apprehensive to take somebody's previous pieces and artwork and reinterpret them into their own voice. I didn't have as big of a problem with that because I'm doing that all the time, taking things that people might have used in a different way. And um and so I tend to do that all the time. I'm always finding something, always observing, always viewing with my eyes and saying, "Oh, this," and then thinking of somebody immediately, like correlating that to somebody else's work, even if it isn't found object work, and saying, "Hey, did you see this, or did you, because that just those pieces parts always come to mind for other people. But yeah, I if I can't use something, I end up asking other artists, "Hey, can you use this?" So
I love that. And we do have a question that I think you might have answered, but maybe you have another take on it, which is what comes first, the material which leads to inspiration or the inspiration which fashions the material?
yeah, I did touch on that. um it like I said, I won't go just like, I'm not like my sister who is a potter, who's like, but still she has to do the same thing. So I guess we are very similar in some ways. Like, she will have to go do a show, an art fair, or she'll have to produce for a gallery. So she'll go and she'll make, 30 mugs and get them ready for a show. Um, and often I will do the same thing. I will only make a piece or only make pieces when I see a show that is calling to me, like, like this show I was invited to. So the concept came first for this show. But again, I usually, when the pieces come first, it's often when I've been gifted something, or when, like, I was talking to somebody and I made this piece because this fiber artist that I know, Carol Pollard, she was in her backyard gardening and she found this beautiful, totally cleaned deer spine. Um, and it was like white because it had been in the ground and the bugs had done their job, and it was beautifully already bleached, and because the bugs had eaten all the stuff away. And so she brought it to me at an opening and gave it to me in a box. And I said, "Oh, cool." And immediately I made a piece that kind of was that, and I called it Carol's Bones immediately, because it was like, yeah, this is the actual object spoke to me first.
I love that. Gwen, it's been such a delight to have you chat with us about your artwork and your inspirations. Thank you again for the generosity of your time and talent. And thank you all for joining us for this artist talk by
And I'm sorry about the technical difficulty.
That is totally okay. And it's Gwen Waight. Gwen White.
Wait,
Gwen
wait,
Waight.
wait.
As a part of our, thank you, Gwen Waight.
Mhm.
As a part of our programming for A Common Thread. Special thank you to our curators as well as the other participating artists, the Ohio Arts Council's board, the Ohio legislature, and the governor who support the Ohio Arts Council, this great space, and of course, Ohio artists. Thanks everyone and have a great day.